Welcome everybody. This is stakeholder meeting number 2 for the restoration project we're calling the Leach Area Habitat Enhancement Project, where we hope to improve habitat for salmonids, especially spawning salmon, in a reach that begins at the 122nd Street Bridge and goes downstream. So it's the first couple tax lots are, I guess, technically part of Leach Garden, but it's not in the actively planted Leach Garden. So we had toward the beginning of last month, we had our first stakeholder meeting to look at conceptual designs. We heard some of the concerns from both landowners in the area and some agency folks, and our designers are from Stillwater Sciences, have put together the first formal engineering design, which is still early in the process and can still incorporate changes that are needed. And Johannes and Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you introduce yourselves and tell everyone your roles on the project.
Perfect. Thank Daniel. So I'm Johannes Beebe. So I'm helping with the design on the project. So I am I guess river scientist generalist kind of by trade, but I'm really excited to be working on the project, and I'll hand it over to Mark.
Hi everybody, I'm Mark Snyder. I'm a restoration engineer with Stillwater, and I'm assisting Johannes with the design for this project.
Great, thank you, Mark. So I recognize all of you guys from before, which is nice. So thank you for coming back. So I think just to pick up from where Daniel was saying, we got the initial comments. We had Chris send us really good information about sewer crossings, and so we really took all the feedback we received on the initial conceptual design, and we tweaked some things to now hit a 30% design, which in the scheme of things is still pretty early on. We still have a lot more design to do and permitting before any construction happens. So there'll be plenty of time to get feedback from you guys and incorporate anything from there. What I would like to do with today's meeting is just kind of go through the plan set again, just show you what kind of updated we have. We got really into the weeds with the hydraulic modeling, trying to hit no-rot certification, which is part of the floodplain permitting process, which is basically we need to try to minimize any flood risks that would be occurring from putting wood structures in the channel. So we can talk a little bit about that and what we kind of see as far as results from that so far and what that means for the project moving forward. And then I think one thing I really also want to do, we don't need answers today, but I really want to, there was comments last time about concerns about tracking equipment all the way down the channel, which we totally understand. So just moving forward, just having people think about if they have a property where they feel like they'd be okay with a machine maybe crawling through the property temporarily to help us get access in other locations besides just up off the parking lot. So just things to consider, and we can talk about that more as we go on. So with that, I think I'll open up the plan set and I'll kind of just go through and show everyone what we kind of have to date. So I'll share screen. Okay. All right, can everyone see that?
Got it.
Perfect. All right. So a lot of it will look very similar to the previous one, but we have basically tweaked some locations, moved a couple structures based on sewer crossings, and just try to get a little bit more approximate location so we don't disturb vegetation, mature trees. It's something we definitely don't want to do with this project. We're trying to squeeze these in locations where they won't do that, where we won't have to remove any vegetation. So as an overview, I know plan sets aren't the easiest to read, but just to give everyone a kind of location, here's the 122nd bridge, if you can see my hand here, and flows going from right to left. So all the work is basically happening downstream of the bridge. We did look upstream of the bridge as part of the project initially, but we did remove any kind of idea of structures occurring up there. We just didn't feel like we'd get the intended function up there, and there seemed to be a better chance of success downstream. So we really focused on adding wood structures downstream of 122nd. And so on this plan set, you can see what we've also incorporated before, which we had before, but we've kind of looked at it a little bit more thoroughly, is this storm sewer line, the SS grade line. So you can see how it does actually come across the channel, stay along the bank for a lot of it, for a lot of the reach. So what this means with the storm sewer crossing, you know, you can assume it might be 4 or 5 feet below the bed, but we really don't want to be doing work anywhere near that infrastructure. So as a result, some of the structures, we have 10 total now that we'd like to put into this reach. A couple of the structures we did swap sides on because of the storm sewer crossing, or we did move downstream or upstream. But generally speaking, most of the properties that we showed wood structures on previously still have those wood structures. So with that, what I'd like to do is move forward and talk a little bit about where the design would go from here. So if there is a wood structure being shown in your property, when we get to the next design phase, we're really going to dig into how are we going to ballast these structures? How are we going to make them stable? Is it boulders on the root wads tucked into the bank? Is it piles? These are things that with our hydraulic modeling, we're going to look into, and we can really then finish the design of the wood structure, the exact location of the pieces, how they're angled, how much ballast, how much, whether it's rock or piles would these need, or maybe ideally none at all. Maybe it's just the bank material itself is enough to hold the wood in place. So with that though, one other big permitting side of all of this is what we call floodplain development permitting. So it's something we need to do through the city of Portland. And ideally for a river project, you do what's called a no-rise certification. And so with floodplain development permitting, you have a 100-year flood that's been modeled for the reach, and it has a water surface that goes along with that, the height and the extent of the water surface. So on here, you can see this blue dashed line is basically the equivalent of that 100-year flood surface. So you can see it goes through some of the property lines, through some of the banks. But what we have to do then is show that we're not going to change those extents ideally, and we're not going to change the height of the surface. So we really dove into one-dimensional hydraulic modeling. And what we found out was basically we aren't showing much of a rise at all, but we're really struggling to find no rise. So meaning we can't show any increase in water surface. We are showing a slight increase, and I'll go through each property where the wood is, and I'll show you what those rises are. We're talking less than an inch up to, I think, 3 or 4 inches of increase in water surface elevation is what we're finding generally throughout the reach, that type of range. So what we have to do then, if we can't hit no rise, which is what it's looking like we won't be able to, we might just have to go through a more complicated permitting process, a more expensive process. It's something no one wants to do, but it's just something that might have to be done in this project. So with that, I'll jump forward and kind of talk about the wood structures and on their property and what rise we're kind of showing at this point. So with each structure, as it's zoomed in, you can kind of see what we're going to do. I'll go to the cross sections because this is a good way to see at each location we're showing a wood structure, we have a cross section, and this will kind of show you the intended work. So this structure is down, going to be wood habitat structure 1. It's down on 12,009 is the address of it. It's on the river left side. And so with this structure, with each structure, what we'd like to do is bury the wood into the bank and excavate a pool so we can get this structure nice down and low. So at low flow conditions, we have all the water over near the pool, create an overhead cover. And so the main work that would be to excavate the bank, install the wood structures, dig the pool, and then build the material back out. So what you're seeing on here might change slightly. These are still kind of schematics of the angles of the wood, the height of the wood, but these are generally what these are going to look like. And then so for this property, what we saw between the existing conditions model, which is no work's been done, where's the 100-year water surface, versus now we put the pool in, we've added roughness, so we have to model that. On this one, we're showing about a 0.3 rise. So just a little over 3 inches of a rise. You can see the 2 water surface elevations are actually on here. So it's very minimal, but it is still a rise. So from a permitting perspective, we're going to have to potentially go that extra permitting route with the Coloma-Lomer.
Johannes,
yes, please.
can
Yeah,
I just
jump
in here?
Yeah,
So
please.
I think as we're showing the different structures, I think it'd be helpful to mention the name of the person who lives there, who owns the property, just in case, you know, someone's watching it and they want to connect it.
Yes.
So this first one, the property owner's name is Hofford.
Thank you. And Daniel, would you mind just doing that for each one? Is that okay? We didn't put the names in here because we didn't feel like we just thought the
No, I understand, but I'm thinking in case somebody's watching this later,
Yes.
they might want to say, oh, that's my property. So
Perfect. Thank you, Daniel, so much. So, and then we'll just keep moving upstream. I'll just kind of take you through here so you kind of get a feel for what the impacts of adding. Whenever you add wood into a channel, it increases roughness. And so what you're going to get with added roughness, you'll get an increase in the water surface locally. So that's just something we have to design for. So obviously
this next property, number 2 that you see, this is Chad and Sarah. This is at your place.
Yes. So Chad and Sarah, on your place, what we're looking at here, it's about a 0.25, so a quarter of a foot. So it is about a 3-inch rise locally on your property. And I'll make sure, like, do you have any, since we're looking at your property now, we moved the location potentially a little bit farther upstream to save mature vegetation. We still, in the next design phase, we'd really like to look into swapping the tires out for maybe a rock pathway or something like that. But we're still kind of trying. In the next design phase, we'll locate whether it's going to be just downstream or just upstream in this area. We know there's mature trees, we know there's drip lines, so we really don't want to impact any existing vegetation. So it might be maybe a smaller 1 or 2 piece structure upstream and downstream of the path. But we know getting access there, might not want a deep pool. So these are all kind of considerations we're taking in and things we'd want your feedback on, whether it's now or later. Yeah.
I think that was also to avoid the sewer line. I think we're a little too close to that. So that was the main concern for that one.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, it looks good. And we're happy to look at some alternatives for steps to replace those stairs. I mean, those tires. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I was wondering too, if the next one, when we talk about it, I think that's between us and Phil. If we could consider putting steps in at that point too.
On this third structure?
Yeah, because we have done some accidental eroding over there, trying to get down and up.
No worries. Access is always something. I mean, we'd much rather include it as part of something with the project instead of seeing tires and things like that. So it's something we can definitely consider moving forward.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, just for anybody watching this later, structure number 3, that is at Phil Barnhart's place. Right.
I'll make sure though.
Right next to Chad and Sarah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Chad and Sarah, anything, you know, like you would locally, if things still might change in design modeling, but generally speaking, there might be a 3-inch rise here. You know, do you have any concerns or questions about what exactly that means for your property?
Yeah, no concerns for there. I mean, our house is so far up the hill that you know, a 1,000-year flood wouldn't affect our built structures.
Okay. Great. Okay, well, we'll move on. So structure 3 was on Phil's property. So here, same thing. I think we adjusted this slightly downstream because of sewer line crossing. And this is where we did have some wood already falling into the channel. So again, I think we were talking last time about, can we incorporate that wood into it? So these are all going to be ongoing conversations into the next design phase. And on this property, we are seeing a 0.2 foot rise here. So a little less than the other 2 properties, a few inches. So number 4, Daniel.
So that is Clovis and Cheryl Hicks.
Okay. Perfect. So on their property, again, you can see we're trying to focus on these areas where we already have eroding banks. And, you know, a lot of this is the ivy. So if we can kind of, there's a nice open area here that we could get structure into, then we can kind of help with the bank erosion and get the habitat with it as well. And on this property, again, it's a 0.26 foot rise. So you're looking about 3 inches on that property.
Yeah, I might want to interject for Butch and
Yeah.
Cheryl.
Yeah.
I visited with them and they were a little concerned about access. So I'm looking at that property right now, and it looks to me like there's just a short area there that they do have access.
Yes.
Is that structure going to be right in that access area that we're looking at?
I mean, ideally, but I mean, these are ongoing to try to not interrupt with other mature vegetation, but these are things that we would love to have discussions about and see if, if they're not okay with it here, could we move it slightly upstream, or, so these are conversations we should definitely, nothing is concrete, and obviously it's their property. It's up to them. So this would just be a continued conversation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dale, I'm taking minutes here, so I'm definitely capturing some of this, and we'll definitely want to get back and talk to them again. Thank you for talking to them. I think next time, if possible, I'd love to come with you and we could talk more about this with them.
Surely, and keep in mind that they're temporarily thinking of moving in August. Selling this property.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you for that information. So structure number 5, Daniel.
That is Raymond and Marion Betts.
Okay, perfect. So again, with here, it's generally the same locations we had before. There is a sewer line along the back side here, so we still have to when we measure distances, it seemed like there's an okay distance, but we just would want to confirm that as we move forward into further design phases. But again, kind of steep vertical banks, a lot of ivy, so mature trees are farther around, but ideally we can find somewhere in this section that we could actually install the wood. And on this property, we are looking at a 0.3 rise. So, just under 4-inch rise in the water surface near the home. Okay. So as we move again farther upstream, number 6.
So that would be Lois and Martin Wegner.
Okay, perfect. And with this property, we know there's 2 tall mature trees with drip lines here. So we'd have to look into it, but this kind of seemed like a good spot because we do have an old boulder revetment that's kind of been falling in and it's creating a little bit more bank erosion. So ideally somewhere here in this bank, maybe we can slip in a few root wads in between, not getting into the roots of the trees, and then also repurpose some of the boulders into again along the bank line to help with some of the bank erosion that was occurring from the boulders that were falling in. So it's hopefully a kind of win-win situation on here. And with this property, it's about a 0.24 foot rise, so about 3 inches. Number 7.
Okay, number 7, that would be Dale.
Dale.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll tell you real quick, Dale. So obviously we know your house is a lot closer to the bank. So there, we're still a little bit uncertain, but we were hoping we could still, if it was a possibility, we could again try to repurpose, stay away from the nice trees. We know how you love your trees, but if there's a way we get at least even a piece or 2 or 3 stuck in here sticking out, we could use the bank here is really tall, so we feel like we get away with some native ballast. Even if these were like 1 or 2 root wads low, we could enhance that kind of already existing deeper slot here and provide some overhead cover. And then on your property, it would cause about, again, a 3-inch rise locally.
Yeah, I'm above the 100-year floodplain a bit, so I think I'm okay.
Okay.
My access point, it really is upstream from that point. That's really steep right in there.
Yes. Yep. Okay. And then obviously with the trees, all of, like, we wouldn't want to get into any of your mature vegetation, but do you have any other concerns, you know, kind of in this general area?
Actually, if we could, I've tried to keep that as natural as possible, but there's some blackberries in there that could just go away. I try to trim but it's so steep it's hard to get in there to get
Yeah.
the ivy out of there.
Okay. Okay. Any other concerns at all or questions you
No,
have for us with the, yeah.
The only thing that I'll share with the group is that next door neighbors downstream from me, Lois and Marty, are concerned about these wood structures that might collect debris floating downstream during any kind of high water times. And who's going to clean those structures up? Or is that just going to be left up to the homeowner?
Well, normally it all depends. It's kind of like a spectrum. So these wood structures collecting a little bit more wood on them tends to actually be a good thing because they tend to seal a little bit better, provide a little bit more function. But if it gets way too much and is causing bank erosion, things like that, you know, where it might start creating a concern, then, you know, those are things we need to talk about kind of like the future management of these structures. But generally speaking, you know, do you have any kind of observations of how much wood actually moves down through this reach and does get racked up naturally? Do you see a lot of wood recruitment?
Not so much wood recruitment, but there will be floating debris, buckets, you know, tires, things that are just floating in the water that will sometimes.
So Dale, my question for them would be, if it doesn't get caught up there, whose responsibility is it? Right. This is a societal issue, the litter in the creek. This isn't just a not in my backyard. I mean, it seems like, you know, like they're just saying, well, this trash is fine as long as it ends up on someone else's property.
Right. I'm just conveying the concern of my next door neighbors.
No, I hear you, Dale, and you know, certainly in my many years in this business, this kind of thing has come up because, you know, nobody wants trash settling on their property. But it's not, you know, something I really have a great answer for because, you know, as we know, there's a lot of urban area upstream, Gresham, parts of Portland. And so garbage does come down. You know, the Watershed Council has a stream cleanup every year, and volunteers pull out about 6 tons of garbage a year in August, but you know, we can't get everything. So I'm not sure how to answer that question.
Sure, but thanks.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Dale. And anything else before I move on? And we can always come back to it as well.
I think as you go downstream, there might be another structure that's on my property because I have almost like a double lot here.
So is this your property down here too, or is this the next one down?
That's upstream. I mean, it's upstream, not downstream.
Oh, upstream. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. That's why I was confused for a second. Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. So, so moving up, so 12, this one's on 122.53. So,
hang on a second.
I can go back to the plan view too.
223. See, mine is 12.2. No, I think it's just
12.253. I think it. Yeah. Yeah. So the next 2 structures are on the property of Crystal Hoffman.
Okay, great. I got you. Sure.
Okay. We can throw another one on your property if you want. Okay. So the next one, we did put 2 here. There's one upstream of the kind of nice existing pool and one that we'd like to put a little bit farther downstream. There's a nice ivy bank there. And so on this property, this is one of the larger rises here, but still, again, it's 0.4. So you're looking at about 5 inches, you know, of rise locally. on this property, but there is more floodplain connection here too, which is good. And so I'll talk about both of these together. So both of these, they're the same, 0.42 and 0.41. They're close enough together. Probably that's the roughness being so close together is probably causing some of the rise as well. And then finally, there's one on the City of Portland property on the river right side, just downstream of the bridge. And this one is a lower rise, about 0.23 feet. So again, about 3 inches. But that is generally what we're seeing. There is more localized, bigger rises at the wood structures, but with the modeling, we do see just a general slight rise through most of the reach because of the increased roughness. So there might be an inch or so of rise throughout the entire reach, according to the model. Which models are tools, they're useful, but they're not always the most accurate. But with permitting, this is what we're going to be putting in, and this is what it's going to be showing. So we have to believe this is truth. So before, I just want to kind of stop there, make sure anyone has questions or comments on how that works with the permitting process, or just general risk, concerns, questions.
So I did want to ask one thing, since Christian is here on the call. Christian, I think we finally came to the conclusion that this property, this small group of properties, is managed by Portland Parks. Is that right? Did we kind of figure that out?
Yeah, that is correct. So it is owned by Portland Parks, more or less managed by Leach Botanical. So Portland Parks itself does not have a lot of maintenance or management responsibilities for it. However, if there was a large project or something going on, we would help, likely with project managers or other kind of support.
Okay. So in other words, it's there's a special relationship that's formalized between Portland Parks and Leach Botanical Garden for the management of the garden. So what I'm hearing is that agreement extends to these tax lots as well, even though this isn't part of the planted garden. Is that?
That's a good question. I don't think we have any maintenance or management responsibility of the parking lot.
Right.
And I think that falls on Leach. I'm unfamiliar with the actual agreement that's signed with the partner organization, but that would be my assumption, given that they kind of control the use patterns of it, especially with different functions that they have and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other, just questions, comments, concerns? Okay, so who wants machines to go on their property? Come on now. No, just curious though. I mean, we do, having the access point at the bridge is great. I'm glad we have one, but it is, I know we had concerns voiced about crawling all the way down the channel, which I totally get. So I just wanted to, see if anyone knows right now if they do have a property where they feel like, they could probably fit a machine through with temporary disturbance, would be reclaimed afterwards. And it's fine if not. I just thought I'd at least ask, and we can continue conversations as this goes on.
I've got maybe an area, but it'd be kind of tough to get to. I have a couple tiny houses on my property on that on the east side, and it slopes down to the creek. But I don't know how viable that area would be. And right now, you'd have to kind of come in through a portion of it. You could come and take a look and see if it's a viable place to drop down to the creek.
Okay, well, thank you, Dale. Yeah, I think the next design phase will definitely start getting more into the details of what this construction would look like. So that'd be great if we can come out and look at that at some point. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
And
Johannes, I think when we're talking about this, it would help to kind of know for the property owners a little bit more detail about what that's involved. So you're thinking of having the excavator moving across the property, but also potentially pulling logs behind the excavator, right?
Potentially, yes. Yeah. So it would be complete, just an access route. I mean, most excavators say 12 feet wide, so it's a path that they would be going, ideally not, if they have to turn, they can turn, but it just creates more disturbance. But if they come in, bringing logs through that area, and so it'd be used as the access route. So ideally, since it's a long reach, we know we can probably get into the bridge. It'd be great if somewhere in the middle or even at the other end, we could get in so we can kind of, limit it. But obviously afterwards, everything would be patched up, reseeded, and it would be a little bit of temporary, until the vegetation grew back, but it would all be mitigated afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to
Yeah.
mention, because I've seen this with other projects that I've been involved with, is that it does look kind of unattractive for the first few months after the excavation, but by the next growing season, it's all grown back.
Yep.
I think just because of the slope, it's gonna have to be somebody on the Brookside side.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Thank you. Okay.
So
Well, I think, yep,
Johannes, I think,
yeah.
I mean, let's assume worst case scenario here that we don't find anybody.
Yeah.
What does that mean for access? I mean, I guess some of it's going to depend on what the permitting agencies are going to allow, but
yeah.
I mean, just in your experience with these kinds of things, I mean, what kinds of things would we have to do? I mean, would it mean like putting in something to like contain the entire flow of the stream to one side while you work on one side and then do the same to the other side? Or what are you thinking?
Yeah, so a larger river, yes. A larger river, we usually coffer it off to one side and kind of can work in the dry. This channel's so small, I don't know if that would be feasible, but we can definitely consider that. I think like there was a part of me that was also, so on previous projects, larger rivers, you definitely can coffer off one side and you basically work in the dry. So all the construction's happening on the one side and then you flip it, work on the other side. Other things we've done is we've had to bring in, kind of tires and other things. So when you're crawling, you kind of keep putting it in front of the tracks or use rubber tracks, things like that to try to minimize the impact. To be honest, in a system like this, we've actually talked about there could be benefits from crawling down the channel. And I know that sounds like weird at first, but with if the channel bed is locked in and kind of armored, on the way out, you can kind of rake it up. And so you kind of get this like fresh riverbed that opens up interstitial spaces, things like that. So I think it really comes down to permitting and what agencies would want to see from us on this. But I'm more concerned about trees hanging over the channel that we would have to then chop off and get rid of. And we'd incorporate them somehow, but I know there's at least two that we'd have to kind of deal with. But I don't know if that answers the question, but it's a tight space. There's not much room. And without a second access, we'll just have to see what the agencies say about going down the channel.
Yeah, I think we'll have to have a conversation with the permitting agencies.
Yeah.
When we did a large wood project further downstream on Johnson Creek 3 years ago.
Yeah.
One of the things we did is we built like these isolation areas out of kind of a visqueen material. And so within that area that was isolated from the main stream, it got really turbid, but that turbid water didn't mix with the main stream. And so that worked well. So that worked, but we had more bank access. We could move the machine on the bank. So a little bit different.
It's a tough one too, because so yes, for the work area where we're going to excavate in the bank, ideally we'd isolate that. I mean, flows, it depends on when we're constructing as well, but flows do get pretty low through this reach. So ideally it'd be pretty simple to keep the water out of our excavation area, like you're saying, so the turbid water's coming through. But I think for most of these properties, realistically, we'd be working from the channel, would be my kind of just gut feel with how steep everything is and trying to not to get into people's backyards. So there is going to be disturbance in the channel, and I will have to try to brainstorm some ways to minimize that. But I think without other access points, it's going to be a tough one to not
Okay.
crawl down. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think from here, so just so people understand, the next design phases, like I mentioned before, we'll continue with design, figure out the ballast on these wood structures, figure out what exactly they look like. So there'll be more touch points with all the landowners with like a more finalized kind of design of what that would actually look like in the property, how far we'd have to dig back into the property to excavate to get some of the wood back into the bank, things like that. So all of that will come into the next design phase. So, you know, I think for now we're moving forward. Everything seems good. It's, you know, it wasn't a surprise we couldn't hit no rise in this reach. And it is what it is, but I think it'd be great to continue to move this forward. And I really appreciate everyone who's so far vocalized being in support of it and having wood structures on their property. It's really great to see.
So I do have one more question.
Yeah, please. No, please. Yeah.
So I think we know that the historic WPA wall
Yes.
is in various parts in this area.
Yeah.
And I think Chris, I know, knows about this since he's been involved in projects for BES in the past, but it brings in, you know, if we wanted to disturb or move any of those stones, you know, there's a whole consultation process that goes on with the State Historic Preservation Office. But I'm just wondering, because in this reach, it's not like it's a continuous WPA wall. There are places where there's no stones and there are places where there are stones. And so I'm just wondering, based on where you would like to put the structures, how much of an interaction with that WPA wall do you think there's going to be?
Yeah, so we got that map that was shared, so thank you for that. Yeah, we have to go back and double check against that. That's something we haven't lined up exactly, so we'll have to go and look at that. But I do think it's inevitable that we are going to get into that wall in some locations. And so what's the process you guys have? We haven't had to deal with that before. Is there a process for that? Does it, and what does that look like? Just a consultation? Are you allowed, or do you have to put it back? What's it look like for that process?
I think Chris knows more about this than I
Yeah.
do.
We actually had the city, we have an agreement or I'd have to put you in contact with the right folks, but they've kind of worked out either an IGA or some sort of agreement that we can remove this work if we utilize the material, like say a kiosk or something in the watershed or things like that. We can reincorporate it, but not necessarily in the stream. So we've, on one of our projects, we salvaged like 500 cubic yards of material.
That's a lot.
Maybe more. Yeah, it is a lot.
Yeah.
But we were able to salvage it, and there's a couple large projects, Westlands and Springwater wetlands that are going to look to incorporate some of that material in their upland design. I'll find the person that's has more knowledge than I do about it, and put them in contact with Daniel, and then we can go from there. But I don't believe that it's we have to put it back. Where I think for the city, our goal is to remove as much of it as possible.
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Chris. That's very helpful.
Yeah, and we'll add that exhibit into the plan set too. So that's something we should just add in there so we know exactly where it's located as well. Yeah, thank you, Daniel, for that. It's a great question. Yeah, just see if anyone else has any other questions or anything. I mean, we really are kind of at a point where the 30% design is pretty, you know, not finalized, but for 30% is pretty much there based on what feedback we received today. So far it sounds okay. But I just want to make sure anyone, has concerns, questions at all.
Daniel, for access, have you guys talked to Kathy over there at your office there, Kathy Geiger? She lives across the stream from us, and when I think about people who have a property that goes up to the creek without a whole lot of big trees in the way, hers is definitely one that comes to mind.
I've talked to her a little bit. I'm not sure if that's going to be a possible access point, but I will talk to her about that and see. But
not to volunteer her or anything, I just figured it
no,
just no one reached out yet.
I know, but I also think it's kind of touchy. I don't want to ask somebody who I'm her supervisor.
Oh yeah.
Access, it's not really a fair question to ask. So
I'll ask. No.
yeah. So I did want to ask Chris one more question. Since some of this is on city property, do you think there would be any benefit for us to talk to folks on the streamlining team, or do you think that's really not necessary here? I'm just thinking because a few years ago we did some projects where we replaced culverts under the Springwater Trail, and we went through the team there just because of all that access to all the permitting agencies all in one room. It was super, super helpful for us. But I didn't know if that would make sense for this project.
I could definitely put you in contact with Dave Helzer, who is kind of leading up that end of things for the city and the agencies. And he would be more than willing to have a conversation with you about it. So
okay,
I'll do that as well.
Great, thank you.
Hey, I just thinking about the cofferdams and things like that. And last summer, BES built the Cedar Bridge project, and where there's a pretty decent diversion on that. I think they used 2 large pipes, like flexible pipes that were, and they diverted the entire flow for, I don't know how long. I'm sorry, Chris might know this better than me. But I'm just wondering, could that be a stage thing where there's like a lower reach and you're working in there and you're building a cofferdam there and diverting for that segment, and then kind of, working in that area and then coming up to this upper middle reach and kind of doing that. And so you're not having to do a full diversion for, that entire length of the project, but kind of piecemeal it. I mean, it sounds like a lot of work, but
no,
just
totally.
wondering.
No, it's a great point. And no, I don't think we'd want to do an entire length thing. I think the ideas would be to track down as lightly as we can to that work area, then isolate that first step, and then kind of move your materials from there. So it would be piecemeal at each location would be the intended thing. It was more concerns about, can we track down this channel all the way if our only access point is at the top? So the coffering off and keeping the turbidity shouldn't be an issue. That should be able to be kept localized.
Yeah, okay.
For sure. Yeah. But thank you. It's a great point.
Maybe to follow up on that, Christian, if I can jump in here. So you're thinking you can do it in 3 different segments. Do you start at the downstream first and work upstream?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking that too after I said that. I was kind of like, but then do you track over what you've done, or how do you actually bring it down? Yeah, it's
ideally you work upstream to downstream, so your turbidity or anything that goes, you're not going over worked areas. Yeah. Good points. Thank you, guys.
What do you think about, sorry, what do you think about the
No.
incorporation of like spawning gravels or anything like that? Is this just kind of a run and that would all just get blown out? Or
No,
is there potential for some of that? And maybe also with that, like justifying maybe some of those additional impacts and then kind of a bit of remediation, like you were saying, for roughness and things like that. I
Yeah,
know, just
no,
trying to think like permitting and like
no, that's
adding
really
in a
great.
little bit more.
No, I agreed. So there is really good spawning gravel size material out there right now. So we don't expect it to blow away. Any of the pool cut we would do that's associated with the wood structure, ideally we generate some spawning gravels there. So those are things we can redistribute out just locally, helps with some of that bar creation. So it'd all be kept in hand. Yeah, I mean, out here in Colorado, a lot of our rivers are really locked in place and sediment doesn't move anymore. So when we do go down the channel, if we do go down channels, we kind of come through and rake the bed up a little bit just to break up that armor layer. So that was something, if we had to crawl down the channel, I was kind of thinking we could kind of just loosen the bed up a little bit, flush some of those fines that have deposited out. It's kind of like you're doing a disturbance event, right? You're kind of acting like a flood, but you're just mechanically doing it just a little bit, a light touch, just especially so you don't see your tracks or anything like that. So people wouldn't know you're there when you crawl out. That's a good point.
Yeah, certainly there's a large part of Johnson Creek where the bed is armored. That is something that we have. Good question, Christian. One of the things we found in this whole section of Johnson Creek, because above Leach Botanical Garden, and I think even in the stretch for this project, there have been some cases in the last few years where trees have fallen over naturally into the creek. And the next low flow season, there's like a brand new gravel bar there. So there's definitely gravel moving through the system. And we're hoping that one of the functions of these log structures is to trap some of that gravel for salmon spawning. So just wondering, Dale, Chad, Sarah, any questions that have come up that we haven't talked about yet?
I don't think I have any questions. No, I don't think so. I do love the rocks that are naturally in this creek. They're so magical. Those like dark, black, smooth rocks. So I love them. And if we add more, hopefully they'll be similar.
Where you're planning to put that log structure on my property, I've got some just huge boulders tucked up against the bank. And boy, if any of those things get dislodged or moved a little bit, that's going to open up for erosion that has been held back for years. And I don't believe any of that is WPA work. I think that's just natural from the volcano.
Yeah, that's what we thought too. They're bigger, rounder boulders. Yeah, no, 100%, especially with your property, you have a really steep bank. So the next design phase, we really want to go out there and look at constructability and how far would we have to dig back into this bank, because are we just going to open up a kind of a bank that's already kind of vertical almost, and are we going to cause more issues with that? If we did touch any of the boulders there, we definitely would incorporate those into the toe of your bank right back into the property where it was. So when you're able to hold the toe of a bank, that usually helps support everything above it. So having those boulders right now are acting as a really good kind of toe protection for your really steep bank. So if we were to touch anything, we'd put it back in.
Yeah, and the area we're talking about is almost directly below where my foundation is on my house.
Yes, 100%. We know that's why this is that's why with the 30% design, where things can change from 60, and usually what changes is things start getting removed. These are the ideal locations we want to do stuff, but as you get in design, you start encountering more things, and you're just like, I don't know if we want to get that close to your foundation, things like that. So the next design phase, we'll plan to be out there on your property. We can show you the limits of impact. And then we can also think through as designers, like, is the risk too much for this location? So these are all questions we'll definitely be asking ourselves.
Yeah, thinking on that, Johannes, is the creek happens to be moving more towards against the bank at that point, the water.
Yep.
And so those big, huge rocks are containing any more erosion.
Yep.
But I am experiencing a little bit of erosion over the 10 years that I've been here. And so I don't know if that's going to be a continual process of this creek, because there's a bend upstream, and then it reverses the direction, and then then I'm in right at the bend of it going in the other direction.
Yeah, you are. I mean, it's a pretty straight channel, but you are towards an outside bend. So those are always areas where you would expect more erosion to occur. When channels do migrate, they kind of migrate towards those outside bends. So you would be just at more risk for more erosion than the person opposite of you on the channel there, because the Thalweg, the deepest part of that channel, is up against your bank and up against your toe. So that is just, yeah. Great questions. Thank you, Dale.
Hey, I've got a question. I've got a question for Dale and for other folks that live along the creek. Do you have a lot of beaver activity through this stretch?
I haven't seen much activity. Nutria I saw the other day going upstream, which was kind of unusual. It's the first one I've seen here in the 10 years. But not so much beaver. I think that's a little bit more downstream. I've noticed a lot of work, particularly at Brookside Park pond, and they're going to work on that in a couple of years, from what I understand.
Yeah, we haven't seen the beavers on our end of this stretch either.
They are further down. So if you like went as far down past our property as you're going up, they can be, you can see beaver slides and things on that end, but you're not getting there.
It's interesting through this stretch, going up into up to Butte's natural area, which is further upstream at like 141st is where I was today. You start to get into the WPA armoring up there, but there's very little beaver activity all through this stretch, all through Wahoo, which is upstream of Leach Botanical on River Left at 122nd place. But there's very little beaver activity all through here, and I'm just wondering if it's because it's just such a straight shot, and there's, kind of what we're looking to address with this project. And Foster floodplain, there is beaver activity where they've done, work, and there are channel spanning dams, and I'm just kind of wondering if it's unlikely because we're not really building pools and things like that, but I'm wondering if this could entice beaver activity or not. It doesn't sound like it's a huge thing. I just think Tideman Johnson has him, Foster floodplain. So I don't know. Sorry, I'm just thinking out loud. I always want to
totally
throw the beaver card in there because it's that wild card in projects. So
I mean, you never know. My gut feel from this area, it's too confined, and you don't have enough floodplain access where flows can spread out. I mean, I've seen bank beaver potentially, but there's also a lack of food supply through here, I'd say, as well. So I would say they're less likely to be through this reach.
Right.
Yeah. Anything else?
All right, well, thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. Like I said, I'll put this up on YouTube, and you know, we're going to continue to, at this point, work on the next design phase and start to contact permitting agencies because there's some unknowns we need to start thinking about now before we get through the next design phase. So thank you, and I will be keeping everybody in touch, and you know, definitely Dale and Chad and Sarah and the other landowners, you know, before we get to the next phase, I'd like to probably talk with each of you individually as we get a little further along. Thank you all.